you filthy swines! Get in here, sit down, we're going to read some news. One question that has occurred to me a while ago is if the idea of a multiverse exists, if it's a reality, then how do the other versions of you out there, how do they think of themselves? How do they fit in within the world around you? Is there any overlap between these different instances of reality? I don't know. I kind of think that maybe Mandela effects might be separate tracks of reality colliding, but that just sounds like some science fiction nonsense, so maybe that's nothing. Let's see from this article on popular mechanics, written by Vlatko Verdal. You in other universes may be silently shaping your reality, Oxford physicist claims. Here's what you'll learn when you read this story. You may feel like you're constantly shaping your reality, but you're not. No, but it could actually be the other way around. According to theory, when we interact with the external world, the crucial changes within us, not reality. However, outcomes in alternate realities might be shaping you in this universe, but we would never know if the two worlds already collided. So that's kind of going in line with my idea of Mandela effects being an example of maybe two separate states collapsing into one. We interact with our environments every day. You might break your favorite coffee mug, stain your favorite sweater, or eat all the ice cream in your freezer. All of this makes it feel like we're fundamentally shaping our reality. But what if it's actually the other way around? What, the ice cream in the freezer eats me? I don't think I like the idea of that. Popularizers of quantum physics often talk about the observer effect, or that quantum objects are usually in many places at once until we look at them. As soon as we make an observation, this quantum superposition of being everywhere at once collapses to a single location, an electron or a photon. A particle of light is always detected in one well-defined position. Hence the notion that observers affect and even create reality by looking at it. However, this is a superficial impression very far from what physicists tell us reality really is. As a teenager, I had a rock band. We once got lucky enough to be invited to play a big gig in my hometown. I cranked my Marshall amp to 11, really wanting to blow away the audience with the guitar riff I had composed specially for that occasion. But my eagerness to impress the crowd caused a fuse in the amp to blow. My bandmates played on and completed a couple of songs without me, while I kept asking myself why I had ended up in this very unfortunate universe. It was only years later, when I learned quantum physics properly, that I realized the way I had framed that very question was completely wrong. Even more amazingly, I also realized that the other reality, the one in which the amp didn't blow up, and I received a standing ovation for my guitar virtuosity, also exists and can ultimately affect the reality in which the amp had collapsed. How can that possibly be? Well, let's consider a simpler scenario than a big rock concert. Imagine instead that a photon strikes someone's sunglasses. We'll call him Bob. After interacting with the sunglasses surface, the photon is in a superposition of being transmitted and reflected away from the lens. That's what quantum physicists tell us. When transmitted, the photon enters Bob's eye, thereby generating a nerve impulse that ultimately results in Bob seeing light. However, when reflected, the photon bounces away from Bob and doesn't generate any neurological response in Bob's brain, which leads to a different reality from the first. According to quantum physics, Bob and the photon are entangled. In one branch, the photon passes through the glasses and stimulates something in Bob's brain, whereas in the other branch, the photon is reflected and Bob is left unperturbed. Both realities exist simultaneously, though Bob only consciously experiences one. In the first branch, Bob knows he has seen the photon, while in the second branch, he knows he hasn't. Well, he doesn't really know that he hasn't seen it. He's just getting on with his day. He's like, oh, light, light comes and goes, whatever. The relationship between Bob and the photon, of course, is the good old Schrodinger's cat state, or a state in which a cat exists, dead or alive, in two realities. Without too much exaggeration, it's fair to say that all quantum experiments are really just more or less complicated versions of Schrodinger's. The Bob who sees the photon may ask why he's ended up in that universe rather than the one where the photon bounced off, just as my teenage self asked why he was in the universe where the amp blew up. But that misses the point. The situation is actually the other way around. The photon that entered Bob's eye led to Bob being that person. different from the Bob in the branch where the photon was reflected. It's the observation of the photon that affects Bob, so it's meaningless for either Bob to ask why he isn't the other Bob. When we interact with the external world, which exists in a multitude of states, the crucial change is in us, not in the external world. In other words, reality affects you, but there's more to this. Yes, but the whole point of this is that Bob is doing the experiencing. So you could try and anthropomorphize the photon. Photon doesn't give a shiz. Photon does not care. Photon hits your eyeball or doesn't. It's Bob who's doing the experiencing. That's my opinion of that. I think the idea that the universe talks into different copies of itself based on interactions and perception is incorrect. I think of it more as perception is like shining a flashlight into the fog. And there are multiple flashlights shining in the fog, and some of the lights overlap, and they are shared experiences, and some of them don't. And perhaps those experiences diverge. And we all share the same universe. It's just that that universe is not bound by 3 dimensions of space and 1 of time. I think it makes more sense to say there's as many dimensions of time as there are space. I mean, why would there not be? So the real universe has multiple dimensions of time, in my opinion, and your personal experience is just one cone of perception shining into that multi-dimensional temporal block. Anyway, where was I? Outcomes in other realities can also affect Bob. For instance, if he sees the photon, he can still be affected by not seeing it in the other branch state. The idea, as always, is to quantum interfere with the two possibilities, or create a superposition and then reverse it. This is exceptionally difficult to achieve in practice. However, if quantum physics is universal, it ought to be possible with sufficient resources. For this purpose, we imagine a physicist, Alice, who controls the experiment in which Bob and the photon become entangled. Alice now needs to reverse the entangled process that has resulted in Bob's observation. If the process is perfectly reversed, then Bob and the photon are in their initial states before the photon has interacted with the sunglasses and Bob has made any observation. Sounds like you're trying to reverse time. Bob's already seen the photon. You can't unconvince him of that. This means that both alternatives, either the photon reflecting off the lens or being transmitted, must have existed and were perfectly superposed in an entangled state. For otherwise, the final state wouldn't be the same as the initial one. What? Or the final state of you reversing the photon state is the same as the initial one. Okay, I think I understand now. We're assuming that we can reverse the state of the photon to exactly match the initial one. Okay. This is what we mean by interference. A superposition is first created only to be reversed. Likewise, the outcomes in both branches of reality must have existed within the entangled state of Bob and the photon. The elements of reality that are encoded into quantum objects are fundamental, and you, in this reality and others, are shaped each time you observe them. Will the reality in which I played a successful gig as a teenager ever collide with my present reality to produce something surprising? Or will you ever collide with the version of yourself that won the lottery? It seems unlikely that the two events will ever quantum interfere given their complexity. We can never rule such things out. The question that still keeps me up at night is, how would you even know if this happened? Maybe just as in Bob's case, the two realities have already merged and many others keep colliding, but I'm simply completely unaware of these extraordinary events. Maybe this is just as well, given that there are so many more ways in this universe in which things could go wrong for us instead of right. Oh, there we go. That's the chap there. Vlato Verdal. Well done, sir. That was a very interesting, albeit shorter than I expected article, and interesting that you're trying to describe diverged realities colliding based upon their entangled states. Are we suggesting here that this might in some way be related to Mandela effects? See, I wonder if there are multiple instances of you who have perceived other events in the past, how would you then collide with a world in which other people experience something different? See, if you had two different separate groups of people who, what's a good Mandela effect? Berenstein Bears is one, isn't it? Some people see it as spelt one way, another group of people seeing it spelt as another way. If both of those people were not 100% certain about the spelling of it, could it be that the version of its spelling that becomes more pronounced, that actually collapses, is the one in which the majority of people who are contributing to the persistence of the society that supports the ones that disagree? Because in that situation, if you're disagreeing, if you have two states that do not agree, which one becomes the concrete reality? It would, in my opinion, be the one that leads to the greater survival of all groups. So it would be the one that is believed by the group that perhaps holds the most leverage on survival for all groups. There was a kind of a survival of the fittest of reality, in a sense. I wonder if that's possible. And then because the other group wasn't quite sure enough about it, they just get swept aside. I don't know. That's a load of pseudoscience nonsense, but I find it fascinating to contemplate whether Mandela effects are in some way what we might call universes colliding or superpositions collapsing that were previously separated. No wonder. That's it for now. Thank you for joining me. If you like what I do, hit the like button wherever you are. But that is it for now. And the only thing I have left to say is Bigwig out.
Oink, oinkity, snort, snuffle, snuffle, squee, oink, oink, ree, squeal, snort, snort, oinkity, squee. Oink, oink, oinkity, squee, squee, ree, 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 snuffle, snort, squeal, squeal, oinky, oink, snort, snort, squee, oink, 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 ree, 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 oh. Snort, snuffle, oink, squee, squeal, ree, snort, oinky, oinkity, oink, oink, snuffle, ree, squee, snort, oink, squeal. Oink, oink, oinkity, squee, squee, ree, 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 snuffle, snort, squeal, squeal, oinky, oink, snort, snort, squee, oink, 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 ree, 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 oh. Oink, oinkity, snort, snuffle, snuffle, squee, oinkity, oink, oink, snuffle, ree, squee, snort, oink, squeal. Oink, oink, oinkity, squee, squee, ree, 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 snuffle, snort, squeal, squeal, oinky, oink, snort, snort, squee, oink, 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 ree, 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 oh. Squeal, squeal. Snort, shuffle, oink, ree, squeal, ree, snort, oinky, oinkity, oink, 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 snuffle, ree, squee, snort, oink, squeal. Oink, oink, oinkity, squee, squee, ree, 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 snuffle, snort, squeal, squeal, oinky, oink, snort, snort, squee, oink, 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 ree, 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 oh. Squeal, squeal, snort, snuffle, oink,